Now, Minister of Finance Enoch Godongwana is faced with making tough decisions when he delivers his 2025 national budget speech in Parliament on Wednesday. Now, the budget presentation was postponed last month after parties in the Government of National Unity could not reach consensus on the Department of Treasury's proposal to increase value-added tax by 2% from 15 to 17%. Now, in his 2024 medium-term budget policy statement, Godongwana revealed that government debt is anticipated to exceed 6 trillion rand in 2025-2026. Now, joining us virtually this morning to talk more about alternatives that the Department of Treasury has to look at to balance the budget books is Matthew Parks, COSATU's Parliamentary Coordinator. Matthew, good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
So, President Ramaphosa has set up a team of ministers led by the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, to work with the Minister of Finance and his National Treasury team in order to consolidate Cabinet's input for further consideration to fund the budget of the 2025-26 financial year. And of course, in the medium term, does COSATU welcome this move, and why do you think that it is a positive or not?
Look, I think we appreciate that we're able to convince other parties, government, to walk away from the precipice a couple of weeks ago. A 2% VAT hike would just send a terrible message to society. And I think you already have workers who are really struggling to make month end, struggling with the high cost of living, inflation, etc. It would have been a terrible thing. So I think, yes, it's clumsy, it is messy, but it is very good that government showed a bit of political humility and maturity to say, okay, let's walk back this budget. Let's have some further engagements. So we hope we've submitted our proposals to government. I'll say, here's what we think as COSATU we can try to suggest as alternatives which are more progressive, which will achieve the same objectives, but not place the burden upon workers. So we are hopeful that government would take into account some of those issues. I think what's critical on Wednesday is to avoid extremes, to avoid a return to austerity budget cuts, which have really cripple the public services that workers, society and the economy depends upon, that we also make sure we have a budget which stimulates economic growth, because we can't continue on a 1% economic growth rate every year and then somehow wonder why we're not generating the tax revenue, the jobs, the prosperity that society desperately needs and the state requires as well. So we really do hope to see a budget which kind of also give relief to the poor and to the unemployed, to stimulate growth, to invest in infrastructure. So it's a difficult balancing act, but we think there are ways to do it. And we think there are ways to do it in a way that's progressive, which doesn't already squeeze workers with meager wages and really helps to shift the burden to the wealthy, but at the same time also to make sure the state has the resource it needs to collect taxes which are already due to the state.
So let's talk about those alternatives, Matthew. What do you propose? Because this budget has to be funded one way or another, and it's looking rather bleak. So what are some of the alternatives that you would propose as COSATU?
So our most immediate alternative is to say, give South Africa Revenue Service, SARS, the resource it requires to collect tax which are owed to the state already. According to SARS, there's about 800 billion rand worth of taxes owed to the state. A 1% VAT hike will collect about 24 billion rand, supposedly. So for us, the simple solution is give SARS at least 2 billion rand extra each year for the next 3 years and require SARS to improve tax compliance by at least 1 to 2% a year. Each 1 to 2% a year tax improvement will bring in about 20 to 40 billion rand of revenue owed to the state. For us, that's the most critical thing. It doesn't make sense to say we have a 64% tax compliance rate, we're going to leave the 1/3 which is owed to the state and go and squeeze those who already pay. That doesn't make sense to us. And what it's going to do is to provoke a sense of tax immorality where society will end up just rejecting paying taxes. And that will lead to the collapse of the tax system. We think there's also some ways, some areas, Sakina, to make sure the wealthy pay their fair share, to reduce some of the tax loopholes that the wealthy, that major corporations are able to exploit, to make sure they really do pay their fair share. We also do think in a budget of 2 trillion rand plus, that if you're looking for 24 billion rand, surely it cannot be impossible to go and find the 24 billion rand out of 2 trillion rand without weakening the state, etc. There is a need for government also to show some humility to reduce some of the wasteful expenditure, to ramp up the fight against corruption rather, to send a message that the executive itself is going to tighten its belt, because it doesn't make sense to say to a nurse, to a police officer, to a cleaner, a security guard, tighten your belt, which is already beyond tightening, but the executive continue to live a very luxurious lifestyle as well. So first, those are the kind of the short and the longer term interventions. But of course, you also need to grow the economy. The reason why the state is struggling is because the economy isn't growing. But if you can invest in infrastructure, if you can sort out ESCOM to ensure there's reliable and affordable electricity, make sure transit is fully operational to unlock the mining and manufacturing and agricultural sectors, make sure metro rail is operational so that the urban economy is productive, etc. Fix local government in our rural towns and our cities, etc. So address those kind of issues, then you will begin to unlock economic growth. Transit alone can take us from 1% to 2% GDP growth a year. So those are the things for us we've got to fix, because you can continue to shift the chairs on the Titanic, you can continue to squeeze people, etc. You're going to reach the bottom. And what you ultimately have got to do is to grow the economy. And I think from our side, cutting the state has shown itself to be a disaster. We need to really reinforce the state, invest in public services, because ultimately that's what helps to grow the economy, what helps businesses to take off, and helps workers to find jobs.
I think everybody in their various corners are starting to sound like stuck records, or have been sounding that way for the longest time as far as growing the economy is concerned, Matthew. We've been singing the same song for decades now and nothing is happening. So where does the problem lie?
Look, to be fair to government, there is some areas of progress. You know, at the beginning of last year, we had about 12 hours of load shedding a day, which was an absolute calamity, to put it politely. And leave aside the last, 2 or 3 weekends, by and large, we're turning the corner on load shedding. It's still very fragile. Electricity is still far too expensive for many industries and for consumers, but you can see some progress. Transit has begun to stabilize, but it's still transporting half the goods it does today than it did 30 years ago, and yet the economy has doubled in size. We are seeing metro rail lines beginning to reopen. I think in the South African Revenue Service, the state has found a model to show how you can rebuild the state, to provide the quality public services society requires, by appointing competent management, removing corrupt elements, filling critical frontline vacancies, and investing in infrastructure of the institution. So, but really, I think to your point, Sakina, is that if we keep cutting, then of course you can't be surprised when there's queues for days at Home Affairs, because they have a 60% staff vacancy rate. They've got an IT system which is decrepit. They've got entrenched levels of corruption in different pockets. So we've got to deal with the hard issues. We've got to show the political leadership. And we've been frustrated for some time because we felt Treasury was simply tinkering on the sides, when we could all see for the past half a decade plus that we are in serious trouble. You can't sustain a society with a 40% plus unemployment rate with 1% economic growth rate. So we hope that we can start to become bold, to really make sure we fix the state, make sure we stimulate the economy through infrastructure investments, through industrial financing, and make sure we begin to break the back of unemployment by ramping up public employment programs. Because if we don't do those hard things, then we'll continue to have this discussion, and one day society is going to erupt. And then the price tag for picking up the pieces then will be so astronomical, we'll regret not making the tough choices.
Has COSATU been consulted by the Minister of Finance with regard to your expectations for Wednesday's budget speech?
So we normally do, arrange meetings with Cabinet, with the Minister for Finance. We did have one short meeting before the first attempt. We have been in contact to raise other additional proposals from our side. Look, we do appreciate that the budget by its nature is a sensitive process, so to speak. The consultation process is not really perfect. But, I think one of the discussions we had with the Minister when we met them before the budget, and albeit a kind of a short discussion, was that once the budget has been passed at Parliament, once you have a medium-term expenditure framework, we do need to have a thorough discussion where we can look at all expenditure items, all revenue options, to see how to really get out of this quagmire. We really need to be sure that everything we put in the budget is really necessary, really has the impact you want, and where there is wastage, we should be shifting money, shifting resources to where it's actually needed, to frontline services, etc. But we do need a thorough discussion. So one positive thing about the 19th of February clumsiness, a bump in the road, so to speak, is that the nation is much more keen to discuss what exactly is in the budget and how can it be reconfigured to really ensure that we produce world quality, a capacitated public service that really invest in the economy, really help to reduce unemployment. So I think for us, that's a positive thing. So from our side, we will hope to have some further discussion with him, because the next step on the road will be the medium-term budget statement. We do think, that, as some ministers have said, that there is a need for a comprehensive review of the entire budget, because you can be sure that within the state allocations, there is still wasteful expenditure. And also there are other ticking time bombs that we're not paying attention to. So if you look at local government, for example, about a decade ago, about 10% of municipalities were in financial distress. Today, it's about 70%. We have about 36 or so municipalities who struggle to pay salaries of municipal workers. We've seen infrastructure in local towns, in rural areas especially, collapsing. I don't even want to get to comment on the issues of Joburg, but it's clear municipalities are in serious trouble. And if we don't act decisively to turn things around, to get a new funding model, and to deal with the systemic structural fault lines in local government, we'll be witnessing other difficulties, and it's going to get to a stage where we're not able to fix it. So I think for us, we have some time. Let's fix these things. We all know what needs to be done, but we do need to show some leadership as well.
With regard to Joburg, what was your comment with regard to that, Matthew?
I didn't want to offend the host of Morning Live who lives in Joburg, but I think we've all seen for some time that Joburg is in a serious crisis. The deterioration of basic infrastructure, the struggling to provide accurate billing systems, and so forth. We had a very useful discussion with the Department of Water Affairs about a week ago, where they kind of just gave us a snapshot across the country about the state of water infrastructure, that about 80% of water infrastructure is in a crisis, to put it politely. So I think for us is that it's not just Joburg. I mean, one can go to Ditsobotla, Machabeng. There's countless municipalities, Komani in the Eastern Cape, and so forth, where it's a real crisis point. And we've got to act now while there's space to fix things, as opposed to waiting for things to get too messy, and then we're in serious trouble.
So it feels like we have this conversation every year, but things don't really get better. Last year, for example, government proposed the implementation of an early retirement without penalties for government employees to mitigate the high public service wage bill. What's your view on that? Good, bad? Is it something that government should be moving on?
Look, I think for us, it's about making sure the public services, the frontline ones, have the resources they need to deliver. So you've got queues where workers sit for 6 days at a time to get the ID documents at Home Affairs. I think we need to move away from an approach which says that investing in state is a waste, whereas actually it's an investment in society. So if you can invest in Home Affairs, people can get the IDs on time. They don't need to lose 6 days of wages whilst queuing. Workplaces are not disrupted. So I think for us, we should not take a shortcut approach, we should be looking at that public services deliver the goods that workers need, society and the economy need. And if you have world-class public services, the economy can begin to take off. Yes, you can't spend recklessly, but we think there are smart ways to do things, to modernize the institutions. But also people have been saying that the public service wage bill is out of control, which is not true. More than 2 decades ago, it was about 40% of the budget. Since 2008, it was about 35% of the budget. And for the last 2 years, it's declined to 31% of the budget. So what we're seeing is a weakening of the state. We need to actually be strengthening it. And we've also seen a declining headcount of police officers, of nurses, of teachers, and so forth. And again, that has a negative impact upon the state. So I think for us, it's about fix the state, because that's going to enable the economy to grow, invest in the economy to stimulate it, and also help create jobs. I think for us, those are the fundamental solutions. If we don't do those three, and we don't have a luxury of choosing which one, we must do all three, then things are not going to improve. So I think for us, really, we do hope government on Wednesday will be bold, won't just look at this as simply a balancing of tables and graphs, but really about how to get the economy moving fundamentally.
We're out of time, Matthew. Yes or no to a VAT increase at all?
A resounding no.
Thank you so much. Matthew Parks, COSATU's Parliamentary Coordinator, talking to us about COSATU's 2025 national budget expectations and, of course, alternatives to the proposal of a VAT increase.